I've been thinking about this passage for the last couple of weeks, and I think we would all say that the Bible is timeless. It can find, this passage could show up in the most normal of seasons in your life and be totally true and equally authoritative. But this passage has found, I don't know how your life is personally, but it's just an odd and even an eerie time right now. I mean, just with a world pandemic and a pretty volatile political scene in our nation. And as I've been thinking about this passage, I know even my life, there's a lot of just fear, and there's some anxiety, there's some stress, there's just some volatility in the world, both for me personally and just looking out in life. And this passage has been very helpful. And I think it'd be really, really great to see Jesus as a supreme light in a eerie and odd and even a dark world. So I don't know where this finds you this morning, friend, but I'm excited to talk about Jesus as the light of the world. It's been profoundly helpful for me just to think about it. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Jesus being the light of the world. It's a very popular little teaching that Jesus has, and it's finding us in a time where I think it's very relevant and very helpful. And that's my introduction. So let's just get right started into the passage here in John chapter 8. And we'll look at John 8, starting in verse 12. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. This is a very profound statement. And it's profound for a number of different reasons. At least two things stand out as to why this statement is so profound. And it's hard for us to pick up on it, but I'm going to try to describe what's going on. One reason that this is such a profound statement is because of the setting that this is in. So this word, again, ties back to the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles, maybe what your Bible talks about or says. But Jesus is right in the middle of the temple teaching to probably thousands of Jews. There's thousands of people that have gathered for the Feast of Booths. This is a long kind of an 8-day celebration that the Israelites put on. And the purpose, I think Josh has talked about it, I'm not sure, but the purpose of the Feast of Booths was simply to commemorate and recall God leading the Israelites through the wilderness. And throughout this 8-day celebration, there was different sort of sub-ceremonies and events that took place to highlight certain specifics about God leading the Israelites through the wilderness. And so right now, Jesus is teaching in the temple, and there's this thing going on called the illumination ceremony. This was one of the things that took place during the Feast of Booths. Now, try to just put your mind in this situation. So the illumination ceremony was when the priest lit these, I don't even know a modern day equivalent, but these massive candelabras, these huge giant torches. I think there were 4 in the temple, and they would light these torches at night, and ancient manuscripts would say that you could see the temple in Jerusalem from hundreds of miles away. It was this huge, bright light that these torches gave off that would light up the sky at night and make the temple really bright. And they would do this specifically to remember that God led the Israelites in the wilderness with a giant pillar of fire by night and a lit up cloud during the day. This specific illumination ceremony was meant to recall and commemorate the fact that God was with the Israelites, leading them through the wilderness via a huge, massive pillar of light by night and a cloud by day. And so let me take you over to Exodus real quickly here and read you a couple of facts about this pillar in terms of what it did for the Israelites when they were in the wilderness. So Exodus chapter 13, verse 20, it says this: And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham and on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they may travel by day and by night, and the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from the people and went before the people. So this pillar of light that was with the Israelites in the Old Testament right here, it was the actual presence of God. They're commemorating and recalling when they're celebrating this illumination ceremony and reflecting upon this event. They're remembering that one of the purposes of the pillar was God present with them, God walking with them, God going before them. It was the actual kind of a visual representation of the presence of God himself with the Israelites. And not only that, it was serving them it was guiding them through the wilderness. It had a leading them, guiding them through the wilderness kind of function. So this pillar of light was the presence of God. This pillar of light was leading them. And then down in Exodus 14, verses 19, this is another function of the pillar. Then the angel of God who was going before the host of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from them before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was this cloud in the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land. This is when Israel was crossing the Red Sea, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, his horsemen. And then listen to this. And in the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into panic, clogging their chariot wheels so they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." So not only does the pillar of light serve as God's presence to Israel, not only does this pillar of light function as leading the Israelites and guiding them through the wilderness, this pillar of light also functions to defeat and conquer the enemies of Israel. So thousands of years later, in the temple, all these Jews sitting around the temple as these pillar of lights were being lit, these torches were being lit in the temple, with this fresh on their mind, thinking about God leading Israel through the wilderness via a pillar of light, specifically God present with them, God leading them, God overcoming their enemies. Jesus stands up and makes this statement. See these right here? I am the light of the world. I am the Messiah. I am what these torches symbolize, that these torches will eventually go out in the morning. As bright as they are, eventually they will go out. I am the light of the world. It's a profound statement. It's a profound statement to the messiahship of Jesus Christ. Jesus looks at all these Jews around in the middle of the temple and says, I am the light of the world. What you're thinking about and reflecting upon in the Old Testament, I am going to do for the entire world. And it's not going to be a temporary season. It's not going to be a light that burns out. It's going to be an ongoing light that can provide light to all mankind for eternity. That's who I am. That's who I am. It's profound because of the setting. It's also profound because of the deep Old Testament imagery and background. Light is everywhere in the Old Testament. Let me just read you a few passages just real quickly in Psalms 27:1. So remember, these are Jewish religious, steeped in Old Testament people listening to Jesus Christ. So they would have just, when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, not only are they thinking about light, but they're also very deeply acquainted with all the light imagery in the Old Testament. For example, Psalms 27:1, they were trained to sing, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Psalm 119:105, the law of God is a light to guide the path of those who cherish instruction. Psalm 44:3, it was the light of God's face that struck down Israel's enemy. Ezekiel 1:4, 13, 26, and 28, God's revelation is like a flash of lightning and a bright light. Isaiah 49:6, all over Isaiah. Isaiah says that he's appointed to bring light and salvation to the Gentiles. It's a messianic prophecy of what Jesus will eventually do. Zechariah 14:5-7. This is really cool. There's a promise of continual light on the last day, living water from Jerusalem. There's going to be a day where there's no darkness, both literally no darkness. It's going to be daytime forever. We'll look at this later. And there's going to be no darkness spiritually. No sin, no suffering, no darkness, no confusion, no chaos. It's all going to be light one day, lit up by Jesus Christ. That's going to happen. It's going to be really cool. Isaiah 9:2, very popular. The people who walked in darkness, that's us, have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, that's us, on them has light shone. And then the big obvious one is Genesis 1:1-4, the very first verse in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Darkness. What is darkness? It's where you can't see anything. It's without form. And darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. It's a great verse on what light does. It just gives form to things that are formless. That's what light does. So this is a big statement, big profound statement by Jesus Christ sitting right in the middle of the temple. All these Jews, very steeped in Old Testament language, very, very fresh on the mind is the idea of light, thinking about the Old Testament, and Jesus stands up and says, "I am the light of the world." So let's look at this passage and just try to pick it apart in verse 12 for a little bit to try to figure out what on earth does Jesus mean by him being the light of the world. And I want us to notice three things. I'm going to read this slowly in verse 12, and let's see if we can understand light a little bit more specifically with this setting and this Old Testament imagery. Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, "I am the light of the world." Notice that Jesus says, watch this, simple but profound, "I am the light of the world." This is first person singular pronoun and the definite article the. I want you to notice I and the. I am the light of the world. Jesus is not saying, me and these guys are a couple of the lights in the world that you can follow. Jesus is not saying, I and somebody else will function as people to bring light to you. Jesus is not saying, I am one of the lights of the world, but there'll be more that come after me. There's other people that will also provide various shades of light. No, friend, Jesus is saying, I, first person singular, am the definite article light of the world. That means for you and I, it is either Jesus or darkness. That's it. There is no other third option. Light comes through a person, and his name is Jesus. He is the only and exclusive light in our world. You cannot find light through anything else other than the Son of God. It is Jesus Christ or it is utter darkness. We are following Jesus Christ in light or we are walking in darkness. That's it. There are only two options. People cannot say, I know God, but Jesus was just a good teacher. That's not happening. That cannot happen. Jesus is the light of the world. You know Jesus Christ, you have the light. You don't know Jesus Christ, we walk in darkness. It is Jesus or darkness. I am the. Specifically in the Greek, it's ego eimi. It is a direct reference to the words Yahweh, this I am statement. Jesus is basically saying, I am who I am, the light of the world. I am God. The light comes through me. It's only through me, and there's no other person that it comes from. He is the light of the world. So know that. No, this is a simple, easy to read over type of truth, but I am the light of the world are critical. I mean, they mean everything to you. They should mean everything to us. It's Jesus or it's darkness. That's it. That's it. Notice the I and the. Also notice that it's the light of life. Let me read this to you. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. In John 1, probably a reference to John 1, 4 through 5, it says that in him, in Jesus, was life. And the life of Jesus was the light of men. This light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Note, friend, that the light here, what is it? What is this light? It's the life of Jesus Christ. So how do we get the life of Jesus Christ? We don't get the light. We're not enlightened because we earn the light. We're not enlightened. We don't receive the light because we become smart enough or good enough or intellectual enough or capable enough to have the light. We get the light in us when we have the life of Christ imparted to us. That's what's happening here. We have the light inside of us when we have the life of Jesus Christ given to us, imputed to us, and imparted to us. What that means is one day when you become a Christian, the wrath of God that's supposed to go to you is taken all off of you and funneled onto Jesus Christ. And then God does this thing, and this is oftentimes neglected when we talk about salvation. We talk a lot about Jesus paying our penalty for sin. But God also gives you the right standing, the righteous life of Jesus Christ. God imputes it to you. He imparts it to you so that God sees you not as a sinner, but as an actual child of God and loves you with the same sort of degree and affection that he loves his own son. He looks at you and sees the life of Jesus Christ. The only way we can have the life of Christ inside of us and subsequently the light is because Jesus paid the penalty for our sin, and God looks at us and says, here's the life of Jesus given to you. So notice that it's having the life of Christ given to you that allows us and enables us to have this light inside of us. Third point, notice the connection between having the light and following Jesus continually. Let's look. And Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of light. There's no way to truly have salvation with the life of Jesus imparted to you and the Spirit of Jesus living inside you, and to continue to walk in patterns of ongoing darkness. It does not mean that believers won't sin anymore. It does mean that the trajectory of your life is going towards Jesus Christ, is following Jesus Christ. My wife and kids and I, so we started watching, I don't know if you've seen the show The Chosen. Real popular right now. It's a show about the life of Jesus Christ. It's really good. Let me just put a big pump up blurb in there. If you're looking for a really good TV show that's not cheesy, really helpful, all about the life of Jesus, it's good. Authentic, yes, it is good. And what I've appreciated about this show is not just the character of Jesus, although it's played really well. I think the guy who plays Jesus plays really well. What I've loved about it is watching Jesus pick the disciples. I've loved watching the disciples. And the reason why I've enjoyed watching Jesus, it's the first series of The Chosen is the early life of Jesus. It's the early ministry of Jesus where he's calling the 12. And the show just provides a lot of color, and it's just like everyday people. And what I love about the disciples is they're a pretty rough and raw crowd when Jesus calls them. I mean, he is not calling, as we read in the Bible, very intellectual and religious type folk. He is not calling those types of people. He is calling people who are working jobs that are borderline unethical. Remember Matthew's the tax collector, and he's kind of up to some shady stuff and not doing, and then he's calling, Peter is a total bozo in the show. I mean, the guy who plays Peter is doing some quasi sinful, unethical things to, try to provide. And it's just like real people. And they're pretty rough. Like the disciples in this show, you can kind of get a picture of them. And then Jesus says, follow me. He goes by one. He finds them one by one, says, follow me, follow me, follow me. And of course they're like, okay, let's do it. And what I love about it is they do not go from super rough to super spiritual when they start following Jesus Christ. That's not what happens. They go from super rough to following Jesus, and then they're still super rough. And as Jesus is walking with them and they're following Jesus, Jesus is constantly like, no, you don't have a lot of faith. No, this is what we're going to do. No, you're wrong, and this is the direction we're going to go. And Jesus is discipling them, a bunch of rough people. But what I love about the disciples is the trajectory of their life, and it's very clear in this show. They've gone from not following Jesus to following Jesus. And I think that's the point. I think that's where light happens. Light's not a standard of morality that you have to attain. Light's not a certain level of spiritual enlightenment that you have to get to. Light is following a person. It's following a man. Light is following Jesus Christ. It's following Jesus, or it's walking in darkness. And I think this show does a great job of taking people that are not perfect, but man, they're following Jesus, and they want to follow Jesus, and the trajectory of their life is headed towards following Jesus. Notice the connection between having the life inside of you and following the person Jesus Christ. That sequence, that arrangement of God imparting to you the life of Jesus because of the work of Jesus, and then you loving Jesus and being transformed and wanting to follow Jesus, and not perfect, of course, but generally in your life following Jesus Christ as the trajectory of your life. That is what it means to have the light. That's what I see. That's what I think it's trying to tell us. And then you're like, here's what happens in this passage we're about to read. In John chapter 6, when he says, I am the bread of life, and then Jesus spends the entire passage talking about the bread of life, eating my flesh and drinking my blood, just hammering it, teaching on the bread. Well, here, as the reader, Jesus makes this profound statement, I am the light of the world, with all this Old Testament imagery and all this setting, and you're just thinking as the reader, Jesus, tell me more about the light. Tell me more about what you mean. Explain you being the light of the world. Show me, Jesus. Well, the Pharisees start asking him these really minute, kind of fine point questions about the law, and it seems like Jesus gets totally off topic. And it's very frustrating for the reader, because I want the Pharisees to stop talking, and I want Jesus to tell us what he means by the light of the world. And as just if you just do a cursory glance at this passage, for the rest of the passage, you think this is kind of a random dialogue. It's kind of this random question, Q&A, back and forth between these hothead Pharisees that are ticked off and Jesus. But commentators point out, and what I want to show you is it's absolutely connected to the light conversation. Jesus kind of has a way here, it's very cool, of addressing the question, but then talking about himself as the light. And what I think he's doing is he's addressing these questions. He's answering the question, and he's showing us why he is qualified to be the light of the world. That's what's going on in the rest of the passage. And I see 5 things that Jesus says as he is qualified to be the light of the world. So let me just give it one big reading, and you'll see what I'm saying, I think. Pick it up in verse 13. So the Pharisees said to him, you are bearing witness about yourself, and your testimony is not true. And Jesus answered, even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I came from, and I know where I am going, but you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for is it not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me? In your law it is written that the testimony of 2 people is true. I am the one who bears witness about myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness about me. And they said to him, therefore, where is your Father? So once again, it's like, hey man, just let them talk, Like, just let them teach us about the light. Where is your Father? A lot of these fine point questions. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. Thing number one, Jesus is uniquely qualified to be the light because it says that he's from eternity. He's from eternity. Look right there in verse 14. Jesus answered this question. Pharisees come up. They must be really irritated. I mean, they're in the middle of similar to a service. This is profoundly irritating. This message of Jesus being the light of the world is basically, and I'm not going to elaborate. I know Josh has been talking. I know I talked about it a couple of weeks ago that the Pharisees do not like Jesus right now because Jesus is a threat to their entire religious system. Everything they've done for their entire life has been built around trying to get to know God through various religious tradition acts. And Jesus is now coming in various ways saying, your religious system is not how you know the Father. That comes through me. Wildly offensive. Another one right here. I am the light of the world. All that stuff that you talked about as the light in the Old Testament, all the imagery, I am the light of the world now. First person singular, the light of the world. It's coming through me. Now they're so irritated that they're standing up in the middle of a service and they're questioning him. Very irritated. And they say, you're bearing witness about yourself. Testimony's not true. Probably a reference to an Old Testament law, a judicial law, where if you were to bear testimony, you had to have somebody else there to also bear witness and tell the same story. And Jesus says, well, good news. Me and God the Father are saying the same thing. The two most powerful people ever, the Son and the Father, are all saying the same thing. So that's generally what's happening. But really what's going on is Jesus is saying, I'm uniquely qualified to be the light of the world for a handful of reasons, one of which is I know where I come from. Even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I come from. Jesus knows where he comes from. He's from eternity. He was with God when God said, let there be light. Jesus was the active agent who made the light happen. And so Jesus is uniquely qualified to be the light because he knows where he's from. He's from eternity. Number two, Jesus is uniquely qualified to be the light because he's going back to heaven one day, right after that. And where I am going, I know where I come from and I know where I am going. This is a great passage, illustration, foreshadowing of like a Revelation chapter 21. We won't read it, but there's this scene coming in the new heavens where Jesus is going to be, there's not going to be a temple because Jesus is going to be the temple. It's going to be God Almighty and the Lamb is what Revelation 21 says. And there's going to be no sun. There's no need for a sun because Jesus is going to be the eternal light that gives light to everything. There's not even going to be nighttime is what the Bible says. There's coming a day where Jesus is going to be so radiant and so glorified and so honored that there's going to be light coming from him that's going to light up the entire new heavens and new earth. There will not be any need for a sun. There will not be any nighttime. There will not be any spiritual darkness. There will not be any physical darkness. It will just be all day with Jesus all the time as he lights up everything. And that's exactly where Jesus knows that he's going. And so he knows where he's come from. He knows where he's going. Jesus is uniquely qualified to be the light because he was sent by God. The passage we just read says that Jesus was sent by the Father to do a specific kingdom building activity for the building up of the kingdom. Jesus does not go autonomously. Jesus is not doing his own thing, and Jesus is not, he's not autonomous in what he's doing. Jesus is sent by the Father. Jesus is uniquely qualified to be the light because the Father not only sends him, but the Father bears witness about him. The Father testifies to him. The Father endorses Jesus as the Son who is sent by him. Jesus has the endorsement and the thumbprint, the power of God God looks at him right at the beginning of his ministry and says, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." And so Jesus is from eternity. He's going to eternity. He's sent by God. God bears witness about him. And even more than that, and maybe even most importantly, Jesus is uniquely qualified in verse 19 to be the light of the world because he knows the Father. He is connected to the Father. He is united with the Father. This is very John language. He's always trying to help the reader see that Jesus and God are connected and united. This is union language, that when you're united with Christ, you're united with God. And to know Jesus Christ is to know God. To know Jesus Christ is not secondary to knowing God. If you know Jesus Christ, the radiance of the glory of God, the imprint of the nature of God, you know in a real way God himself. So Jesus is interacting with the Pharisees and talking to the Pharisees about all of these kind of fine point laws, but he's always taking a step back in this conversation, and he's saying, I'm uniquely qualified to be the light of the world because of all these things. And no other person has these things like I have these things. I'm from eternity. I'm going to eternity. The Father bears witness about me. The Father sends me. And by the way, I know the Father. I have a relationship with the Father that's unlike anybody else. I am the light of the world, and I'm qualified to be the light of the world. When I was in college, I went through this really cool season in life where, I don't know if you've had seasons like this, where it just was one of those seasons where God was very clearly speaking in my life, where he was just more tangibly present, and there was just certain people in my life and events that were going on and that were shaping and influential. And one of the things that a mentor of mine told me to do was to read through the book of John. He said, I want you just to sit down and I want you to read through the book of John. And I remember doing that very vividly as a college student. And what stood out to me was not the miracles of Jesus Christ or the teaching of Jesus Christ. I had grown up in the church, and I had heard the feeding of the 5,000 and all the various miracles that took place, and was familiar with the teaching of Jesus, and even the light of the world was familiar teaching. But what stood out to me was how Jesus operated in life. What stood out to me was how he interacted with such a wide, diverse group of people and handled all the various things that he was involved with such poise and such confidence, and with no fear and no sense of being rattled and no sense of being anxious. And you get to a passage like this where he's in a very heated debate with people. Like, I can't even imagine, if I'm speaking in a temple with thousands of people and people start standing up, questioning what I'm teaching, and very, very abruptly calling me out and pointing to fine points of the law, I would feel very rattled by that, and there's a very real scenario where I say something stupid and somebody in here walks out of here and says, that guy said something stupid, and you talk about me on the way home. You know what? Hey, I'm comfortable with that happening. I'm sure it happens. I'm sure it will happen. And, but it's a whole different story when you irritate somebody so much that they stand up out of their chair and they say, I'm going to talk to you. I want to talk to you about it right now. Not on the way home. I want to talk to you about it right now. We are going to have a dialogue. That's a level of tension that's a pretty high level of tension. Jesus is, watch this, totally unfazed by this. Not rattled. Whether he's dealing with a woman caught in adultery, whether he's dealing with the woman at the well, the Samaritan, whether he's putting out a fire with the disciples, whether he is engaging in tense conflict, like he's been in tense discussions the entire Feast of Booths for the past 8 days. This is probably the 7th or 8th day dealing with Pharisees and questions, and he's completely unmoved by it. And I just want to take a step back and say he's unrattled by anything that happens because he's so deeply connected to the Father, and he's so, watch this, he's so not autonomous. Everything in the book of John, you see this in Jesus all the time where he says, I don't even do my own will. I only do what? What I see my Father doing. When you see me, you're not seeing me doing anything special. You're just seeing me do what God tells me to do. I'm here not because I'm here. I'm here because the Father sent me. He's so united to the Father that he functions through life and operates in life with such poise and confidence and no anxiety and no stress and no fear. There's no fear. It's him being and living as the light of the world. This is exactly a picture of what it looks like to be light, to be connected to God, to be so connected to God that one is unfazed by the world. That's a demonstration in this passage of what I think it means to be living as a light in the world, as the light in the world. And if you're a Christian in here, it's not exactly, we can't say the same things that Jesus can say, that we're from eternity and going to eternity. But man, we get a lot of that, don't we? Like when you understand, friend, that everything around you is temporary and that one day you're going to be in the new heavens and the new earth. You're not going to be the light like Jesus, but you're going to be in the light with Jesus, right? Like when you understand that all the stuff going on in our world, the darkness, the confusion, the chaos, the volatility, just everything that's going on, whether it's personally or in our nation or in our communities, all of it is very temporary, and there's going to come a day where Jesus is the eternal light, and you will be with him in the new heavens and the new earth. Boy, that gives me a lot of confidence. That gives me a lot of joy and peace when you understand that God sends you. You don't have the same sent mission as Jesus Christ, but is it not true that God does put Christians in exactly the place you are in right now? It is not a coincidence that you are exactly who you are, wired the way that you're wired, working the job that you're working, in the community that you're in the neighborhood that you're in, for specific kingdom building activities. Is that not a true statement? That God looks at Christians and says, you are a sent people. In the same way that I sent my son, I am sending Christians, literally means little Christs that are just sent into the world. God puts you where he wants you to put you and says, you are sent by me to do specific kingdom building activities in my world, and be confident because I'm with you. I am the pillar of light right now, Jesus Christ, the light of the world. He guides you, he's present with you, and he's defeating your enemies and overcoming your enemies. I mean, did Jesus not defeat and overcome the three greatest enemies in our life, Satan, sin, and death? Satan, the greatest enemy that's ever existed. There's no greater enemy that's ever existed than Satan. No greater enemy. Satan and his servants, defeated. Sin, there's no greater disease that's ever existed. Not cancer, not anything. There's no greater disease that's ever existed than sin. That is the great disease. In death, there's no greater penalty that's ever been laid down on mankind than death. The penalty of death is the greatest penalty. Satan, sin, and death. Simultaneously and completely defeated by Jesus when he rose from the dead. So now, we're sent by God. God's defeated all of our enemies, all of our real enemies. See, all the stuff that we're afraid of every day, let me just speak very candidly. They're not anything compared to Satan, sin, and death. They're all temporary. Every little worry and fear and enemy that you have, perceived enemy, it's all really just perceived enemies. It's not real enemies. Jesus has already dealt with Satan, sin, and death, already created an eternal home for us, is the light right now in the new heavens and the new earth. We will be present with him one day. So God puts you in here. He sends you. He bears witness to you. In the same way that he bears witness to his son, he says, you are my child. He's not detached from you. He doesn't send you into the world and say, see you later. Good luck. You are on your own, man. He sends you into the world, drops the very Spirit of Jesus Christ inside of you, and says, I'm present with you. You're my child. I love you with the same level of affection that I love my own son. I now look at you and I see the life of Christ in you. I love you. So be sent. I'm present with you. And, oh, by the way, you're going to come be with me one day. And And then the core of it is you know God. That's the whole point. You know God. We know God. We are in right standing with God and can know the Father. And all of that to say, I see Jesus demonstrating and operating as the light of the world in this passage as he's teaching on the light of the world. It's great. It's great. And so let me close up and just say, the hard thing about, and this sounds a little bit cliche, but I'll just say it. The hardest thing about spiritual darkness and light is we don't often know that we're in the spiritual darkness. Like right now, if we were to shut off all the lights in the room and we were to be in physical darkness, we would know it instantly. We would know it because our physical eyes would tell our physical brain that it's dark in here. The problem with being spiritually in the dark is sometimes we don't know it. And it takes a work of God, like in John chapter 6, to draw us to God. It also takes maybe one step before that, a work of God to show us that we're in spiritual darkness sometimes. Sounds weird to say it, but to take off the blindfold and to help us see that we're in spiritual darkness so that we can be drawn into the light. And I just want to give you the opportunity to look at your own life. It's either following Jesus or walking in darkness. It's Jesus or darkness. It's the light of the world or it's spiritual darkness. And the hope is that Jesus, just like the verse Josh read for our intro, what a powerful verse, that God would show in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. That's a profound verse. And it happens right inside of us where God looks inside of you and says, hey, you're in darkness right now. Let me show you the light. Let me show you the light. The light, not a moral code, not a list of to-dos. Put all that away. Light as the person Jesus Christ. That's the light. That's the light. In the temple, to burn the candles, they would take these robes, these big giant garments, and they were soiled and bloodied priestly garments. This is what they would use as the wick for these giant candelabras in these temples. They would take these man-made giant robes and basically cover them in oil, bloodied, old, soiled garments, and that would be the wick that lit up all of these candelabras in the temple for the illumination ceremony. It's really cool. And without even probably planning it, this was a flash forward, kind of forward-thinking illustration of what the true light would do on the cross just a short time from what we're reading, that in moments from this passage, Jesus would hang on a cross, bloodied, soiled, bruised, beaten, battered, as the light, the true light of the world, as an illustration of the light. He would literally become the wick here. And that's what it means to be in Christ. It means to trust and treasure him, to believe that on the cross, as he was the light of the world, taking the sin that you rightfully deserve and taking the punishment, and then in turn giving you right standing with God, giving you the Holy Spirit in your life, and giving you freedom from all of your sin and promise of eternity. That's the good news today, that Jesus hung on the cross as the light of the world. So why don't we bow our heads, and we're going to do some communion to celebrate and to recall, to commemorate, to remember the cross of Jesus Christ, that Jesus hung as the light of the world. And then we'll do a little bit of worship. And so, Father, thank you for just being a light for us. God, we thank you for sending your Son. We thank you that Jesus was so helpful in how he taught us to be the light, taught us that he is the light. And God, I pray that right now in this moment that you would take the light and just shine into our life and help us to see the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. And that would expose darkness in our life, that would Expose areas where we are walking in darkness. Expose areas where we have not fully trusted in you. Expose areas where we have not fully surrendered to you. Expose apathy in our life where we're not fully committed to you. And I pray that you would give us just a lot of courage and a lot of strength to walk into the light. That you would draw us into the light. That you would show us where we're spiritually dark, and that you would move in those areas in some profound ways. And so, Lord, we lift you up this morning. Pray that you'd be glorified, and pray that you would be a supreme light in what is a chaotic and confusing and really a pretty dark season that we're in right now, whether it's personally or in our nation. So God, I pray that the supreme light of Jesus Christ would just be over everything, that it would be fresh on our minds, that we would be transformed by this light, that we'd be changed from one degree of glory to another, that we would ultimately know you in a deeper and fuller way in a season of chaos and confusion and maybe darkness, that the light would be very light in our life. So I want to give you just the opportunity for the next few moments to pray where you're at, to confess where you're at, to worship where you're at. We have communion set up in the back that you're free to partake of when you've made it right with the Lord. And we just pray that this would be a really good moment for us as a church, as believers, to think about God, confess, and to worship Him. So we love you and praise you. It's in your Son's name.